He got my wife pregnant and turned my world upside down. Now my brother wants my help after our parents cut him off and left me their $2 million legacy. My younger brother, David, turned my life into a nightmare, then impregnated my wife. Now, after our parents disowned him and passed their $2 million inheritance to me, he's seeking my assistance. David always held a deep-seated animosity toward me. You might assume it sprang from envy, but that would be incorrect. He was the favored offspring, not I. There's no cause for him to be jealous. To give you some context, our mother constantly indulged David. He was the family's prized child. She prepared his meals, handled his laundry, and even asked me to help him with his school assignments. I was expected to assist him simply because we were kin, yet I never received comparable consideration. I accepted this, being quite self-reliant. Perhaps it was partly my fault for consistently fulfilling his needs without anticipating anything in return. He never offered help when I required it, approaching me only when he desired something. While I was a quiet, reserved child who relished studying and keeping to myself, he was loud and boisterous, just like our father. I also tend to be direct and truthful, never softening my words. I believe my mother may have formed a negative impression of me due to my candor. This favoritism made David the family's darling, and I didn't object to it during our childhood. However, issues began when he started tormenting and ridiculing me for being unlike him. He would mock my height and the fact that I wore glasses. He would sneak into my room, read my diary, and then complain to our mother about my writings. When I confronted him and reported his privacy invasion to our parents, they would dismiss it with a laugh, saying it was inconsequential. He committed more egregious acts, like nearly shattering my glasses and placing disgusting items in my food. He even once put tiny stones in my cereal, though fortunately, I discovered them before they could harm my teeth. When I informed my mother, she shrugged it off, stating, "This is how brothers connect." Whenever we argued, David would pinpoint my insecurities to verbally abuse me. We attended the same school, so he was aware I was being bullied by several classmates. Instead of supporting me, he sided with the bullies, calling me names like ugly loser or hairy monkey, and inciting them to physically harm me, asserting I was just a big failure. On another occasion, during a trivial disagreement I can't even recall, he told me to end my own life. While I could usually shrug off most insults, that one deeply wounded me because I was battling mental health issues at the time. I'm doing better now, but it was crushing to hear my own brother wished me dead. Given that Dad was frequently at work and Mom seemed rather indifferent, she even reprimanded me once, claiming it was my fault for annoying him. Things deteriorated progressively during high school. There was a shocking incident when David attempted to ignite my hair, and incredibly, our mother defended him, asserting he was merely playing. Seriously, who behaves like that? Thankfully, my dad eventually sided with me and highlighted the seriousness of the situation. He even threatened to involve the police regarding David. This moment was a true revelation for my brother, as he had never before faced any repercussions for his actions. He was genuinely taken aback, and my dad made it clear that enough was enough and that David needed to begin respecting his elder brother. Later, Dad entered my room to converse. I never anticipated his support because he always told David how alike they were, which was true. Dad confessed that he had waited years, hoping David would mature, but he was gradually realizing that David was becoming a significant tormentor. Hearing this from my dad was incredibly affirming, and I nearly broke down in tears. I revealed everything David had done to me over the years, and even mentioned the bullying at school. My dad was astonished by how much I had endured. The next day, he spoke to the principal to ensure the bullies received a stern warning about severe consequences if their behavior continued. Later that evening, Dad enrolled me in MMA at our local gym, instructing me that I needed to become tougher and confront bullies in my life. I admit that a studious kid like me attempting to learn to fight might have seemed ludicrous, but I was highly dedicated. I managed my time effectively to balance my academics and daily workouts, and the MMA classes entirely transformed my life and physical appearance. One day, David was engaged in his usual mischief. He stole my pocket money, which we received for helping with chores. I had been accumulating it for a while. David snuck into my room and took it. I caught him just as he was preparing to cycle off with his friends. I demanded he return my money, but David taunted me, saying all I could do was run to Daddy for help. I don't know what possessed me, but I punched him in the face. He was stunned, fell backward, and I retrieved my money from his pocket before pushing him back down. David began weeping loudly, which was quite amusing. However, my mother rushed out to assist him and discover what had transpired. When she learned I had fought him, she was surprised and rebuked me, stating I should be a better example for David, who seemed to revel in seeing me scolded. My mother also complained to my dad about my conduct, saying I needed to be controlled. My dad sternly asked both of us to explain ourselves. I informed him how David had stolen the money I had diligently earned and saved, while David attempted to justify it by saying he needed the money for a date and that as his brother, I should aid him. However, Dad told David he was fortunate I only punched him for stealing because anyone else would have contacted the police. He continued to tell David that he had no right to take others' possessions without their permission. David disliked that and threw a fit, likely hoping our mother would side with him, but Dad remained resolute. When David realized he wouldn't be disciplined for being hit, he shrieked how much he despised me and retreated to his room, locking himself inside. Following that event, David began to distance himself from me. He had finally grasped that he could no longer torment me and that even Dad had ceased supporting his antics. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we were equals. Though he could no longer physically harm me, he resorted to verbal insults when our parents weren't present. His behavior worsened with age, becoming angrier and more irritable each year. When I approached him with a question, he would ignore me and walk away, mumbling insults like nerd or loser under his breath. If he needed to convey something, he would relay it through our mother instead of speaking directly to me. When I questioned her about why David couldn't simply talk to me, she would urge me to be more understanding. I couldn't discern if it was merely puberty or genuine malice. Over time, enduring his comments became intolerable, and I yearned to move out and escape him. I repeatedly asked my mother to facilitate a direct conversation for us to resolve our differences, but she consistently refused, stating she didn't want to get involved. When I sought her opinion on why David treated me this way, she would dismiss the query. Eventually, I departed for my dream university, having secured a scholarship as a top student. My dad hosted a party for me, and even my mom seemed proud. However, David remained aloof and distant, barely acknowledging my accomplishments. The day I left for university was a blend of anticipation for the future and relief to escape the stifling atmosphere of my childhood home. The initial few months at university were liberating. I forged new friendships, enjoyed my courses, and began to construct a life separate from the oppressive environment of my youth. The constant dread of David's verbal assaults lifted, granting me a newfound sense of tranquility. During my second year, I encountered my wife, Karen, at a frat party through a mutual friend, and we immediately connected. Hailing from a religious background, having children outside of wedlock was frowned upon. Nevertheless, when we discovered she was pregnant in our final year, we decided to marry immediately after graduation. Our wedding was a modest but joyous ceremony. Our parents were pleased for us, and we savored the celebration. At that moment, I believed Karen was the love of my life. I had always envisioned a monogamous relationship, one woman to return home to and share my existence with. Despite other women showing interest over the years, I never pursued anything because I was genuinely content in my marriage. Karen was my ideal partner, and I never wished to harm her. However, I later uncovered 2 instances of infidelity in our marriage. One was an intermittent affair with her married coworker that spanned several years, and the other was a brief liaison with an ex-boyfriend during a visit to her family. Some might consider me naive, and in retrospect, I can't entirely disagree. Each time, we separated for a period, yet I chose to forgive my wife. I didn't want to raise our child in a broken home, and believed we could surmount these obstacles. The affair with her coworker occurred when we were young, and I attributed it to youthful errors and poor judgment. For a while, things seemed to improve, although I could never fully trust her again. I did my best to set aside my doubts, understanding that if I chose to forgive, I had to genuinely strive for a new beginning. 4 years have passed since her second betrayal, and I felt confident in my decision to grant her another opportunity. Karen seemed to have changed, and we were genuinely happy, planning our family's future. However, 3 months ago, my world was shattered once more when she revealed she had been having a long-term affair and implied that our son might not be mine. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. A mix of shock, treachery, and disbelief overwhelmed me. I struggled to grasp the enormity of her confession. In a haze, I managed to ask why she had kept such a significant secret and how she could have done something so devastating. Her reaction was cold and indifferent, as if she were detached from the pain she inflicted. Her vague responses left me with more questions than answers. It was a surreal and painful moment, confronting the shattered trust and uncertainty about my own family. I continued to press Karen for the truth, because I felt I deserved to know the father of the child I had been raising since birth. Ultimately, she admitted it was David. My eyes widened in astonishment as I asked Karen what she meant. She explained that she and David had become acquainted when I introduced her to my family, and she stayed with us from Thanksgiving until New Year's. David, typically cold toward me, was warm and courteous toward her, which made me glad because I didn't want Karen to feel unwelcome. Karen desired to be accepted into my family, so she spent considerable time with my mom whenever possible. She noticed the divide between David and me and questioned me about it. I confided in her about our strained relationship and explained that we might never mend it due to his unresolved sentiments. Karen understood but began including David in our excursions, hoping it would foster a bond between us. Whenever we intended to watch a movie, she invited David, and we watched whatever he selected. During this period, David and I exchanged a few words, which was an improvement compared to his usual silence. I recall Karen and David socializing and playing video games together, but I never gave it much thought. Karen told me that one day, David confided in her about his difficulties following a recent breakup. Feeling vulnerable, he formed a friendship with her. She mentioned that he would harmlessly flirt with her when I wasn't around, and eventually, things escalated beyond her control. The image of my wife and brother being intimate made me feel nauseous. Karen confessed that she felt guilty afterward and left him, which coincided with her abrupt decision to go home instead of spending New Year's with me. Although I attempted to persuade her to stay, she was insistent on leaving. When we reconvened at college after the holidays, she was her usual cheerful self, so I didn't question anything. 2 weeks later, we discovered she was pregnant. Karen admitted she didn't know if the child was mine or David's, and with no means to prove it, she chose to stay with me, knowing I was the more reliable brother. This was the reason we married. My world felt like it was collapsing. The son I adored might not even be mine. I asked Karen if she had been intimate with David recently, and she slowly nodded. She revealed that they had always maintained contact because their chemistry was undeniable. They would sneak off to hotels, fabricating stories about working overtime. She admitted that half of her business trips were actually romantic escapades with him. I asked why she married me if she desired my brother, and Karen stated she didn't want to be the one to end the marriage. She perceived me as a wonderful father to our son, and opted to remain. In her words, she made a mistake and didn't know when to stop. I informed Karen I was glad she told me the truth, but that I was going to pack my belongings and depart. She began to cry, pleading for forgiveness, and expecting me to shout at her. Instead, I calmly packed my clothes. Karen insisted that if I loved her, I should fight for her and that errors occur in every marriage. When she realized I wasn't going to do anything, she shifted tactics, saying our son would be impacted by a divorce and that children shouldn't be raised in broken homes. I reminded her that I might not even be the father, which made her cry more and accuse me of being cruel. It seemed she believed nothing could compel me to leave the marriage. Perhaps it was partly my fault for allowing things to slide in the past. While I did love her, it felt more like it stemmed from thinking we had a son together and had been together since college. Karen kept insisting it wasn't too late to salvage things, but I struggled to believe her and had no patience left. Trust was a significant issue, and her words felt hollow. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget she had been intimate with my brother. I've always believed in forgiving mistakes because we're all flawed, but this was beyond acceptable limits. I left her crying on the doorstep and checked into a hotel. The following day, I went directly to my parents and revealed everything about my wife's affair with David, explaining how they had been secretly intimate for years. The shock on their faces was undeniable. True to her nature, my mother initially attempted to defend David, insisting that her son could never do such a thing to his own brother. Determined to expose the truth, I asked my parents to remain silent and let me call David in front of them. I instructed them to stay quiet so I could catch David off guard, making him believe it was a private conversation. When David answered the phone, I confronted him about the affair. At first, he adamantly denied it, refusing to accept any responsibility. However, when I told him that Karen had confessed everything, he began blaming her, labeling her immoral. He claimed it wasn't his fault if women were attracted to him and that he was the more attractive brother. I told him firmly that I would expose him to everyone. When David mocked me, saying no one would believe me because he was the golden child, I scoffed at his arrogance and thanked him for confirming the truth, knowing our parents had heard every word. David fell silent and then stammered, attempting to explain himself and salvage his reputation. My mother, still reeling from the shock, demanded an explanation from David. He faltered through a weak attempt to justify his actions, blaming everyone else but himself and desperately trying to shift the blame onto Karen. I could see my mother, who had once been protective of her favored son, now felt a mixture of disappointment and anger. In that charged moment, I felt a peculiar sense of vindication. For years, I had endured David's torment. Now the truth was out, and the roles were reversed. It was David who stood exposed, his actions laid bare for all to witness. As David's words faltered, my father, typically reserved in his expressions, couldn't mask his disappointment. He asked me to pass him the phone and began to speak to David. David, my father started, his voice heavy with disappointment. What you've done isn't merely a betrayal of your brother, but a betrayal of this family. You slept with your brother's wife and continued the affair even after they were married. Your actions carry severe consequences and have irrevocably shattered the trust we placed in you. I raised both of you to value family loyalty and integrity. What you've demonstrated today defies everything I've tried to teach you." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink into David's conscience. "Your disregard for your brother's feelings and the lack of respect for his marriage are unacceptable. You've not only hurt him but also fractured the bonds that unite our family. Your mother and I bear some blame for what you've become, but we will no longer tolerate this behavior. From today, you're cut off from the college funds I established for you. You'll have to figure out how to pay your university fees on your own. I will also cease funding your lifestyle. Do you believe it makes you more of a man to be intimate with married women? Let's see how you manage without my money." Throughout this, I maintained a calm demeanor. Although I initially wanted to scream at David, witnessing my dad punish him was the ultimate vindication. I had exposed his true character, and it was evident he had underestimated the repercussions. My mother, despite David's persistent pleas, continued to defend him, but my father swiftly ended the call, cutting off David's attempts to rationalize his actions. Afterward, my mom approached me and embraced me. It had been a long time since we shared such a moment, but in that embrace, there was an unspoken understanding and support. Amid the family turmoil, she apologized for not believing me all this time. My 14-year-old self could never have envisioned this moment, being vindicated and embraced by my mother. Following this, my dad helped me find a competent lawyer to divorce Karen. She and her lawyer attempted to fight unfairly, requesting alimony since I earned more than her, but her affair weighed heavily in my favor. We also conducted a paternity test, and it was confirmed that David was indeed the child's father. The news was incredibly painful, even more so than discovering Karen's infidelity. I was furious that the son I had loved and raised wasn't mine. However, I resolved to remain strong. Karen implored me to continue visiting my son, arguing he shouldn't be penalized for the situation, but I couldn't bear to see him. He reminded me too much of David, and I detested it. After my divorce was finalized, a sense of liberation washed over me as I moved into my own bachelor pad. It felt surreal to live alone since I had married so young and never truly had the opportunity to experience independence. However, my inherently independent nature allowed me to quickly adapt to my new lifestyle, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. 2 weeks ago, my dad called to inform me he was considering altering his will because he didn't wish to leave anything to David. My dad is incredibly stubborn, and once he decided to sever ties with David, he adhered to it. David tried to contact our parents and even appeared at their doorstep, begging for forgiveness, but they refused to let him in. Even my mother, who usually succumbed to David's tantrums, seemed to be done with him, though it must have been most difficult for her. David never messaged me to apologize for his actions, indicating he had no regrets. He was just upset about being cut off from our parents. Dad told me he intended to bequeath everything to me, ensuring David wouldn't contest it later. He would leave David only $1. My eyes widened in shock, as my dad had diligently worked his entire life, including his assets, retirement fund, and life insurance. The total amounted to nearly $2 million. The sole condition in his will was that if my dad passed away before my mom, she would continue residing in their house, even though ownership would transfer to me. I didn't object to this, as I wanted to care for my mom in her final years. Somehow, David discovered this and, unable to reach our parents, called me yesterday, attempting to reconcile. He explained how he was struggling with college and that after Karen discovered the child's paternity, she had been harassing him for child support. He said he had no money and was seeking part-time jobs but couldn't find anything. He begged me to speak to our family to start anew since he genuinely needed my help. I laughed in his face and told him I was finished with him. I reminded him that he should have considered the consequences before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. David argued that I was being unjust and that Karen was also to blame, to which I agreed. I reminded him that I had divorced her, making her his responsibility now. He shouldn't be calling me to complain about her or the child since these were the outcomes of his own actions. David began to raise his voice, but I interrupted, reminding him that he was no longer the favored child in the family, but the outcast who had been intimate with his own brother's wife. At that moment, David began to weep, telling me how everyone, including our grandparents and relatives, had turned against him. While this was true, it was no longer my concern. I told him we were through, and that he should never call me again since I no longer considered him my brother. Since then, I've replayed the conversation in my mind. Despite my animosity for my brother, I had never heard him cry, at least not since we were children. I won't lie, it did pain me a little to see him so helpless. So, I suppose I'm here to ask if I should discuss him with our parents, or if I would be wrong if I didn't. Update 1. Hello everyone. Many of you have been inquiring why I am no longer in contact with my son, Henry, and some have even labeled me cruel. I need to clarify that I am not comfortable raising another man's child. This is not a stepson situation. I was led to believe Henry was my son, only to later discover he is actually my brother David's son. Understandably, this revelation caused deep pain, and I wept over it for days. The primary reason I desire no contact with Henry is that I no longer want Karen in my life. If I remain connected to her child, she will find a way to re-enter my life, and I require my space. You may perceive me as cruel or selfish, but I cannot see him ever again, at least not for a very long time. Update 2. Most of you correctly deduced that it was my mother who informed David about my dad altering his will, prompting David to call me as a last resort to rectify things. I confronted her in front of my dad and she broke down, saying I had punished David sufficiently and that he had learned his lesson. My dad firmly told my mother that if she believed what David did was forgivable, then he could no longer remain married to her because he could never forgive such a betrayal. This threat silenced my mother. My dad made it clear that if she ever communicated with David again, and we discovered it, she could pack her bags and leave. As I mentioned, my dad is very resolute. Hopefully, my mother will learn from her errors. Update 3. Reddit. It has been 5 months since my last update. My relationship with my parents has improved over the past few months. My dad and I go golfing every weekend, and he treats me more like a friend than a son. Although my mother misses David, she has kept her distance from him. The last I heard about David was from my cousin, who said David had been soliciting money from everyone and eventually had to drop out of college because he couldn't afford the tuition. He and Karen are living together, and he has a part-time job as a mechanic. Apparently, they are raising Henry together, which is a positive development, I suppose. I never discuss David with my parents, and they don't bring him up either. For everyone asking, I am doing quite well. I was promoted at my job 2 months ago, so my salary has significantly improved. I haven't been dating anyone as I feel I still require time and space to heal. I've been attending therapy, so we'll see how that progresses. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay informed about more shocking real-life stories happening around you.